Bret Hart in WCW is fascinating. I know that Arn Anderson had talked this week about, he just wondered why the Bret run in WCW never did very well. And when Bret went to WCW, he's the biggest star in wrestling, and then they just never capitalized on it. He was, throughout '98, he never had the big run with Hogan. They never did a big Canadian tour. They never did big UK or European tours where Bret was a big
Yeah.
name. Why did Bret's WCW run, do you think, why did they not use those tools that they had with Bret as well as they should have?
Um, I mean, there was lots of different reasons. I mean, so much has been written about this, and Eric Bischoff has talked about this on a number of occasions, and I think he's rightly said that Bret was not the wrestler that he had been when he arrived in WCW. I mean, I remember right after the double cross, Bret did, I think it was in a column in the Calgary Sun, or did some sort of interview, and he said words to the effect of WWF killed the Hitman at Survivor Series. And I think there was some truth in that. And I think part of him was left in the ring that night, and he never really recovered. I mean, actually, obviously didn't kill him, but that was, he was severely wounded, I think, by the double cross. I don't think he ever really got over it as a performer. And I think once he got into WCW, he realized that things were going to be very different. In WWF, he'd had to fight for the top spot, as we know, against Shawn Michaels and all these other people. It was a constant, I mean, dating back to obviously stuff with Hogan and various other people who were trying to take his spot. So when he was in WWF, he still had that fight in him. He still wanted to be that top star, and he wanted to prove that he deserved that spot. And after he lost the belt to Yokozuna at WrestleMania 9, then Hogan came in, and then there was this long road back to the title at WrestleMania 10. But Bret was willing to put the work in back then. He wasn't jaded, he wasn't bitter, he hadn't been there, seen it and done it. He still had so much to prove. And you look at that year they had in 1993 with King of the Ring, the feud with Lawler, the stuff with his brother Owen, the Royal Rumble 94 with the double finish with Luger and Hart. And going into WrestleMania 10, it just felt like Hart was the biggest star in the company and wanted to be the biggest star in the company, and wanted to prove that he was the biggest star in the company. You fast forward to the end of 1997, Bret's had that amazing year, 1997, which, I remember we ranked him number one in the PS50 that year. He had such a fantastic year in the ring, with the match with Austin, the turn, all the different things he did, from the Canadian Stampede pay-per-view, the matches with The Undertaker at SummerSlam, and one night only in Birmingham, wasn't it?
Yeah.
One night only in Birmingham. Then he, of course, the match prior to the double cross, the match with Michaels at Survivor Series was super hot match, and Hart was just at the top of his game. Goes into WCW. As I said, I just feel like he wasn't the same guy. It was just like amazing to see the difference in him. And also he's there in a new company, and he's got all these other people that politically are more powerful than him, who he's somehow got to defeat to become champion or to have anything close to the level of creative attention that he had in WWF. I mean, there was a massive, great logjam of stars there. So I think, the combination of Bret just not really wanting it anymore, and WCW being this political minefield, which he didn't really know how to negotiate. I mean, it was going to take him a very long time to really work out how to get anything done there. I think he just sort of assumed coming in, because they were paying him so much money, that they were going to use him as in the same way that Vince had. And that was just not the way it worked there. So I think he was pretty much scuppered from the off. I mean, literally, you go back and look at Survivor Series 1997 and the way the Sting-Hogan match played out, and Hart coming out, and that was just, the match was a shambles. Hart's involvement was just muddled. I mean, he did have the match with Ric Flair that sold out, which I think was a good match. But I'm sure his first match on TV, and people I'm sure will correct me if I'm wrong on this one, was against Bryan Adams, who was one of Hart's buddies.
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a boring match. And I remember thinking, why are you having a match with this guy? on TV. This is your first TV match. Could be wrong about that, but I just remember it being a pivotal match in his WCW career. And it was just such a tedious match. But it just, there was so many obstacles for Hart to overcome. I think even if he'd been driven and passionate and hungry and wanted it, I think he probably would have been derailed by somebody along the food chain, possibly Hogan, who knows, possibly someone else. Obviously, there'd been friction with Flair dating back to the time in WWF. So there was obviously people there who didn't want him to succeed because it was going to affect their positions. It was going to affect their spot and the amount of TV time they received. So, yeah, there was a lot of things working against him in WCW. But I think another one, and, I've said this and I've written this before, I just don't think Bret came in there, wanting to perform to the best of his abilities. I think he was wounded. I just don't think he'd really recovered from the Survivor Series. So there was a lot of things working against him.
Do you think if when he had come into WCW, wounded after the screw job, and WCW gave him a hot start, would that?
Yeah.
It feels like that would have changed something, because when he came in, like you say, like he comes in, he's the referee. There's a screwy finish. He has the match with Flair, which is good, but then like uncensored, he's facing Kurt Hennig. He's just kind of a mid card guy, and it didn't feel like WCW really put any effort in. Whereas if they had given him a big storyline to start with, and then say by March of '98 he's over headlining a Germany tour, and he got some momentum behind him, things would have been a little bit different. Because you talked last week about when you interviewed him for Power Slam in '98. Like, I mean, I think he was willing to do it, if not, maybe not as enthusiastic as before, but it feels like the push really didn't help.
No, I agree absolutely, and also they ended up turning him heel. I think it was May of that year. I think actually it was at Slamboree in the match with Randy Savage. I think that rings a bell. And it was just like, well, why have you turned him heel? Like less than 6 months after he's arrived in the company. And this is a guy that's, still got a lot of sympathy over the double cross. And there was a lot of things you could have done with him, as you say, on tours of Europe, which, WCW never exploited that market at the height of its popularity. It did do tours, but never really did sort of big tours or really maximized its potential. Didn't do the Canadian tour in 1998 when Hart would have done sellout business for him, for sure. And there was just so many things they could have done with him as a babyface, and then they rushed the heel turn because it was as if they just didn't have any ideas for him as a babyface. But you're right, it was they didn't have a plan. Clearly, they didn't have a plan. I'm not trying to put all the blame for this on Bret Hart. Absolutely, WCW failed him. There's no doubt about that. They brought him in, and they just did not have a long-term plan for him because there was so many other people to serve. I'm sure McMahon realised this, that Hart going there, I mean, we thought first after the double cross, Hart's going to fortify WCW's ranks and make them even stronger. WWF's never going to catch him now. And in a way, sending Bret Hart there just complicated the main event picture and just made things more difficult for WCW management because you had so many stars to try and appease that it was almost impossible. And in the process of having this top-heavy roster of stars, it meant that your mid-card players, the spots at the top were blocked for the mid-card players who wanted career advancement. So then they started looking elsewhere for work, or morale was damaged, and it just had this sort of domino effect of making things more difficult for WCW. I mean, all this kind of is, a paradox in a sense, because WCW had its best year ever in 1998. So, I mean, you look at the financials, it did tremendous in 1998, but there was, trouble brewing. Clearly, there was going to be problems in 1999, and there were huge problems, as we know. But it's a really kind of regrettable situation, the way it all played out. And in a sense, yeah, WCW should have had a plan for Hart. I fully agree with that. But knowing how complicated and how tricky everything was backstage, and how lots of people were acting in their own self-interests and not the interests of the company, was that really feasible? Was that ever really going to happen? And I think if it was ever going to happen, it would have done.